Welcome to the Finding the Magic podcast, where books come alive. I'm Tricia Copeland, a fiction author and host of this show. If you love books, finding great reads, and hearing about the story behind the story directly from the authors, this is the place for you. Whether you like fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, or romance titles, I think you'll find something to love in my playlist. Listen in to discover something magical about a book or two today.
Hi, Sam.
Hello.
I'm so excited to welcome Sam Beck today. She is a YA fantasy graphic novelist. Did I say that right?
Yes.
And I looked you up a little bit. So you have maybe 6 or 7 books, right?
Yeah, so I mostly do illustration. I always like to say like I'm an illustrator first and a writer second, but I do have my own series first, which is like a YA fantasy graphic novel that I've written and illustrated.
Fun. And that is the Verse series, correct?
Yes, yeah.
We'll start in. Tell us about the world, the characters, what's going on there.
Yeah, so Verse is set in a world where magic is feared and only these monsters known as the Vel know how to use it. That's what Fife, one of the main characters in the books, thinks at least until he meets this girl named Nithya who has mysterious powers, and everything he ever believed is kind of turned on its head. They kind of go off on a journey together to learn more about who this girl Nithya is, why she has these powers, and they kind of, discover what their paths are together. They meet a whole like ensemble of other characters, and yeah, it's a trilogy fantasy series, with the third book coming out in August.
Oh, congratulations. That's awesome. The name of the first book is The Broken Half. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah,
And the second book is The Second Gate. Do you want
yeah.
to, can you tell us a little bit about the plot of the second book, or does that ruin it?
No. So the second book, so the first book kind of ends off on a cliffhanger. There's this character named Branka who is very interested in having magic return to the world, which, some people are into this idea and some people, find it very terrifying because up until this point, kind of all they've known is these, like monsters called the Vel are terrorizing them. Like they're not totally on board with the idea of magic coming back into their lives. But Branka kind of wants it back, and she learns that Nithya can kind of help this happen. So she kidnaps Nithya at the end of book one, and book two kind of starts off with this like big ritual that this character is doing to kind of get magic to come back to the world. But it goes quite wrong quite early on in the book, and this causes a lot of chaos for everyone involved. Um, Throughout book two, our two main characters are seen separated. They kind of have to find their way back to each other, while all this chaos is happening in the background.
That sounds really fun. Do you have a copy of your book so that we can see it and see what it looks like?
I just moved, so I can actually, if you give me a second, I can go behind my bookshelf and
Okay,
grab
yeah,
them.
definitely do. I'd love to see, because I looked at the covers and they're amazing.
There we go. Just unpacked, so everything is actually on hand. So this is book one, The Broken Half, and then book two.
That's beautiful.
So each,
What does it look like on the inside? Like, I haven't read a lot of graphic novels. It's been a minute since my kids were young and I looked
yeah.
at
So the full color graphic novel. Like I've always been really big into manga and stuff like that. So that's kind of where like the influence for what the characters and stuff look like. It originally ran online. But thankfully it got into print. Yeah, it's been very fun working on it.
That is beautiful. And I think I saw a map in the back too.
Yeah, it's very funny. Like when I was writing these books, I have like notebooks and notebooks of all this lore and stuff, and there's maps and locations, but like we don't actually learn a whole lot about it, but it's, in my head, I think it's a fun thing to include, even though it's not big on like exposition of of the world.
And you said you started as a graphics person. So tell me about that and how your transformation into being an author yourself.
Yeah, so I originally went to school for graphic design. When I graduated, I kind of spent 5 or 6 years working, doing a lot of like web design stuff for banks and very, you know, industry stuff like that. I was living with my now husband at the time, and one day I'm like, you know what? Like, I really just want to take a year to focus on doing illustration. It's something I've always loved doing. Did a lot of it in my spare time, and kind of wanted to try my hand at comics as well because I've been a fan of them for a while. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna leave my job, take a year. If it doesn't work out, I can always find another job in this field, and just get back to it. So I took that chance, and thankfully it worked out. One of my first gigs was with a couple writers in Toronto doing this comic called the Necromancer's Map and Songs for the Dead, which is like another fantasy type comic. And yeah, it kind of just worked from there. Like, I've been extremely lucky in my journey. Obviously, like, I've worked at it, and like I like the illustration, but I think a big part is just like getting my foot in the door that first year, and it kind of snowballing from there.
I know, I'm looking at your work and thinking I want to hire you to do my graphic novel. And when you're doing these graphics, do you hand draw things? Or are you drawing them on a computer or a tablet, or how is that coming about?
Yeah, so on my original, that comic I just mentioned, Songs for the Dead, I actually drew all the line art by hand with like ink and pen, scanned it in and colored it digitally, which is quite the process. It takes a long time to do. You're left with huge stacks of paper. So now I do everything digitally with like a computer tablet, straight to digital. It's a lot faster. I can like get through things really quickly. I miss doing traditional stuff, but like it's such an easier process having it be digital.
Okay, and now I'm remembering because I teamed up with an artist to have a middle grade book illustrated. And so he did like 10 illustrations, and he did it the same way. Like, he drew them all by hand, he scanned them in, and then at the end he was like, oh, this was so hard. I could have done it a different way.
Yeah, I want, like, I mean, I'm so impressed when uh comic artists still do everything traditionally, because it's such a labor of love. Like, so much work goes into it. Just like, I mean, for me at least, like, working traditionally, I'm like 10 times as slow. I'm sure if I did it all the time, maybe I'd get faster, but like, I have so much admiration for people who do things traditionally still. But it was just much easier for me to work at like a pace that my publishers prefer doing it digitally.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm always so impressed with people that can actually draw, or I have no artistic like drawing talent, because if I give my cover person like an idea and I'll draw it out for her what I think, and she's always like, what is this? What is this? She's like, no, just don't even try to draw it.
No, but you know what? I've worked with writers quite often, and like they'll be trying to explain something to me. I'm like, just draw it out. Even if it's like a stick figure, even if it's a bunch of chicken scratches, it's actually really helpful to me if you have like a complicated kind of layout or cover idea. Even if it looks, indecipherable, it's still actually super helpful. So I mean, I'd appreciate that as an artist.
Yeah. Well, now what I do is I go into Canva and I pull pictures of different things and put them
That's great
together.
also. Yeah.
So that way you don't have to look at my stick figure drawing. That is so fun. So tell me about the third book in this series. What are we going to see the characters doing?
Yeah, so the third book is called The Song. So after book two, all this chaos happens. The world that our characters are living on is on the brink of destruction. Everything is going very badly for everyone. The third book is really kind of exploring what it means to not to come to a compromise, but to, take this thing called magic and like see if it's possible to actually have it in the world and live with it in like a harmonious way. And a lot of the kind of conflict in book 3 is different characters having different opinions of what this means. Some people really don't like the idea of it, some are more open to it. So it's a lot of like interpersonal dialogue and conflict between various groups and characters who believe that magic can either be good or bad. And it really falls upon our main character, Nithya, to kind of form her own opinion of what she thinks the right thing to do is.
And what are some major themes? I was reading a little bit of your bio, and I'm getting a little bit of a picture, because a lot of times, well, in superhero novels and comic books, there's this thing about people having power, and is that power, or a major theme, is that power dangerous or is it safe, or, you know, and those people that don't have power are scared of the power or the magic, which I kind of relate to being the same thing. So what are some other major themes that you wanted to explore with these characters?
So the books themselves are kind of geared towards like a young audience, like maybe 13 to 16 years old. So the characters themselves, at least the main characters, are in that age group as well. So it's not only these like bigger themes of like, you know, what it means to have power, but like for themselves, they need to find out kind of where they stand in the world. So a lot of like growth and self-discovery, which I think are very popular themes in middle grade books. Yeah, it's like for one of our main characters, Fife, his kind of journey is being this like very anxious, scared child, and like going through this, you know, scary world, and like figuring out how he wants to react to it. And I think his character was really fun and interesting to me to write, because a lot of like male protagonists in fantasy series like pick up a sword, you know, go fight. And I really didn't want that for his character. I wanted him almost to have like this pacifist view of the world, where he's still going to stand up for himself and his friends, but not in a combative way. Whereas like Nithya, who, you know, she's a total mystery. She doesn't really know much about herself. She learns it over the course of this book. So for her, it's more about finding like a sense of independence and her own voice, because she's having all these people kind of put their views upon her, and she needs to figure out, you know, where she stands in the world.
That's really neat. How did you come up with the idea for their story?
I think it's just like an amalgamation of like all the things I really enjoyed kind of reading and watching growing up. I think I said before, like I really loved anime, manga, play a lot of video games and stuff like that. I'm a big nerd. And then a lot of these like things I enjoyed, like they had these casts of characters who had such like deep personalities, which I didn't really see a lot of in traditional Cape comics, like in Marvel and DC comics. You don't really get this like introspection of characters that you do in a lot of Japanese comics. So I wanted to kind of bring that into my work. And I think like fantasy is just a fun genre. I like drawing more like naturalistic scenes, a lot of like nature and stuff like that. So it just made sense for me to draw something that I enjoy drawing.
Right. Yeah, it is. So is the world in the future, or is it supposed to be in the past? What is their technology base?
So it's, I mean, I guess it's set in the past, like it's very European, like medieval kind of architecture and stuff like that. What's interesting is I think I've described this book somewhere before as being post-apocalyptic, where there used to be magic, it disappeared for reasons. So as you're flipping through the book, you'll see, you know, like stuff that looks very modern, like an oil rig or some kind of like mechanical thing, but it's broken down and abandoned.
Okay.
With like things growing over it. So now our characters are living in kind of this post-magic world where they're not super technologically advanced. Magic is really that like fascinating technology that's not accessible to them anymore.
Okay, neat. And it looks like you have some other publications too, in addition to this series. Can you talk about some of your other books?
Yeah, so the other books I've worked on, I haven't been the author on, I've been the illustrator on. One that's coming out next week, I think, actually, in 2 weeks, is called Loving Ohio. That one I'm really excited about. I teamed up with the writer Matthew Ehrman. Loving Ohio is, set in modern times in our year in the fake town of Loving in Ohio. It deals with a lot of like teen angst and weird cults and stuff like that. But a lot of like the inspiration was taken from the writer's time growing up in Ohio, so a lot of like suburbs and kind of stuff like that. So it's super different from the world of verse, which is fantasy and beautiful scenery and all of that. And I found it really fun to work on. I always tell people, like, when I was doing a lot of the research for the settings in Living Ohio, I would just be on Google Maps, like checking out the suburbs, making notes on things. So that's one of them. I've also been the artist on a series called Renegade Rule, which is a really fun kind of sci-fi comic about this group of girl gamers who are into this competitive VR game. So that's like a whole different genre. There's a lot of, you know, gaming, like fake guns, stuff like that. It's super fun, very funny. The writers are hilarious. Like I've never laughed out loud so much reading a script for a comic before.
That's awesome. Yeah, it sounds like you're really challenging yourself doing all these different genres as far as the illustrations and illustrating lots of different worlds.
Yeah, I think it's fun. Like, I mean, I think fantasy will always be the thing that I enjoy doing the most, but it's fun to explore other things. Otherwise, it gets boring. So it's fun to do other stuff.
Yeah, I challenge myself by like entering an anthology where they force you to do a certain theme or or have certain themes in your stories. And yeah, it's fun to just kind of grow your artist or grow your craft.
Yeah, and you can almost like bring that stuff back into, what you love. Like now you've gone out there, you've learned something, you've pushed yourself. Now it's like, okay, I like this part of it. I can bring this back into my work.
And so if an author wanted to make a graphic novel from their series, would they contact you? And because that's a whole new world for me. I haven't so I feel like I entered the audiobook world and I need a narrator, and now I'm like, oh, that's another thing I could look into.
Yeah, so when I was starting out, I was kind of just like a freelance agent. I had people just reach out to me. Usually they would send me a pitch. So they didn't even have like a script sometimes. Like when I was working with Matthew on Living Ohio, we had worked before on something else, but to pitch Living Ohio, he literally just sent me like a page and we got on a call and we talked about it, like, this sounds fascinating, let's do it. Then we put together like an actual pitch for a publisher and had our agents go and sell it to them.
Okay.
I also work with an agent who goes out and finds me stuff. So I work on some like IP based work. So like Legend of Korra is one of the comics I've done illustrations for, and like Star Wars and stuff like that, like really like short ones. So I'll work with my agent to bring in that illustration work.
Neat. Yeah, that's a whole new career path that I hadn't tapped into yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think for writers, like the majority of like the creator-owned stuff that I've worked with other writers, like they just cold email me with their pitch, and if it sounds cool, then we talk further, kind of see where they want to go with it. I like being involved in a sense where like I don't obviously want to like write with them, but I like when they give me a certain amount of freedom to make suggestions, because you'll be handed this script and like sometimes it just doesn't flow as a picture or as a comic. So it's really nice when they when they have the confidence in my skills to be like, maybe we should like tweak this slightly. And I think that's kind of the best kind of collaboration, is when there's this trust between the writer and the artist to do that.
Right. That was my experience when I was working with the artist, because we came together and he had the idea for a character and I wrote the story around he just had a name is really all he had. And I wrote the story around this name, and it ended up being an Aztec mythology. And we were kind of sending ideas back and forth. And at one point he was like, this doesn't really ring true to the character. And I was like, yeah, but I don't know how to fix it. Like, so it was, that's the first time we didn't write together, but we kind of like bounced ideas. I thought
Yeah.
that's the first time I'd ever done that. And I think it made the story a lot better. So
Yeah.
So what's next for you? Is this verse series a trilogy? Is that what you said, or is it gonna
Yeah,
go
yes. So it's a trilogy. I've been working on this series since like 2016 when I like, left my job originally. It started off as a webcomic. It was free to read for a really long time, and then thankfully a publisher picked it up for the second and third book. But I'm happy with it being a trilogy. I've worked on it for long enough. Like it's like always sad to like close the books on these characters that have like been with you for so long. But I'm also really happy that I have like a completed series of books and I can move on to something else.
Do you know what that is, or are you still coming up with ideas?
I'm right now working on an unannounced project. It's going to be, I think, 4 books. It's also set in a very like similar fantasy world. Can't really say more than that, but I'm the illustrator on that project. It's been a lot of fun to work on because it's back in like my fantasy wheelhouse. Going forward, I'd really like to like get into another genre, which is cyberpunk. I've always been super fascinated with that genre. Um, I read like Neuromancer by Gibson like back in high school, and like even though I did not understand half of what was going on in that book, I was so kind of enamored with the aesthetic and kind of the world that was being built. So I'd like to do something in the cyberpunk genre. Have some things kind of milling about, but nothing is set yet.
Okay, so I know what is it steampunk? I know what steampunk is, but tell me what cyberpunk is.
Yeah, so cyberpunk is like something set in the future. Usually it's very dystopian. You have a lot of like corporations taking over, you know, the city that people live in. A lot of like AI technology, like implants, a lot of like humans interfacing with technology and machinery, and kind of like what that means in this world when you have corporations that maybe control implants and how people interact with that. It's it's usually quite dark, quite dystopian, but I do like that genre.
Okay, so that sounds like definitely more sci-fi-ish then, right?
Yes, very sci-fi. Yeah.
Okay, fun. Well, this has been so fun. Tell us where we can find you, Sam, and your books.
Yeah, so you can find my work at sambeck.ca, and you can find more about Verse and read it online at versecomic.com.
Great. And I found you on Goodreads, so that's also a good place to find your books.
Yes, I as an author, I don't like looking at Goodreads, but it's a great place for other people to go to.
No, I know. I every once in a while I check it. I'm like, why did I do that?
Yeah. Yep.
We had lots of great reviews, so it was fun looking here. Okay. Well, thank you for being here, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Finding the Magic podcast. I'm your host, author and podcaster Tricia Copeland, and I love getting behind the scenes. If you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe and stop in each week to discover new authors and books. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep finding the magic.